Stephanie Jones and Blake Lively have been very busy, filing and supporting multiple lawsuits that appear to be intended to overwhelm Justin Baldoni's legal team. The strategy, it seems, is to draw attention away from what may be considered weak lawsuits by filing additional lawsuits. If enough people sue Brian and Melissa, it can give the appearance of a smear campaign, even if this is not necessarily true. Without this explanation, the lawsuits begin to lack credibility. However, if it appears that everyone else is doing it, the story seems more believable. One of these lawsuits was filed in 2025 against Brian Friedman by the surviving spouse of one of his former clients. Friedman had represented the client in a lawsuit against Justin Baldoni for copyright infringement. After the client's death, the spouse sued Friedman for violations of privacy, defamation of Travis Flores, and breach of attorney contract, essentially suing him for malpractice. When all this surfaced, I pointed out something important: the statute of limitations had already passed. I also explained that legally, defamation claims don't continue after someone has died. As painful as it sounds, the law sees it this way: once a person is gone, there's no legal reputation left to protect. Till the lawsuit was filed. And it felt strange. What were the chances that someone who tragically passed away from cystic fibrosis would have a spouse suddenly step forward with a lawsuit, seemingly out of nowhere, with no prompting? Then I remembered a text exchange between Brian Reynolds and a representative at WME. The message suggested they'd been hearing from people who had worked with Baldoni in the past, saying he'd caused problems for others. There had also been earlier conversations about lawsuits tied to him and issues reported on his film sets. So when Travis Flores' surviving spouse appeared in 2025 ready to sue Brian Friedman almost immediately, it felt less like coincidence. I talked about the lawsuit when it was first filed and said I didn't think there was much behind it. The situation is heartbreaking, and it's impossible not to feel sympathy for the surviving spouse. At the same time, it also felt like someone may have encouraged them, possibly Lively or others, to believe this legal move was a good idea. Brian Friedman responded to the allegations, defamation, breach of contract, malpractice, and more by presenting evidence. He included a copy of the original settlement agreement from when he represented Travis Flores in the copyright case against Justin Baldoni. That evidence showed Friedman had very little direct contact with Baldoni. Most communication happened through CBS, since the project involved CBS, Lionsgate, and Wayfarer Studios. The documents also revealed that after reviewing around 1,500 pages of material, it became clear the screenplays weren't even remotely similar. The theory that Baldoni had somehow accessed Flores' script simply didn't hold up. So Friedman filed what's known as an anti-slap motion, a motion to strike the case. In January, he told a California court that several of the claims were blocked by the statute of limitations. He argued the allegations were tied to speech and conduct connected to judicial proceedings and to matters of public interest. He also pointed out that privacy and defamation claims can't be brought on behalf of someone who has passed away. And in this situation, he said, there had been no invasion of privacy anyway. He hadn't disclosed anything private or even mentioned Travis by name when answering questions. He also invoked legal protections like fair report privilege and litigation privilege, which shield certain statements made in legal and media contexts. As for the claims of malpractice, breach of contract, and fiduciary duty, Friedman argued they didn't apply. He had never represented Flores and Baldoni at the same time, and his later work involving Baldoni wasn't related to the earlier case. He also stated clearly that he never shared any confidential or attorney-client information belonging to Flores. Because parts of those claims relied on alleged statements about Flores' reputation and character, Friedman argued they essentially circled back to defamation, and again, defamation cannot be claimed on behalf of someone who has died. Friedman then submitted a declaration that adds another layer to the story. He explained that after the original litigation was filed, the defendants in the Flores case made it clear they never had access to Flores' script and that their project, 5 Feet Apart, had been created independently. On October 18, 2021, he received a detailed letter from David Grossman, who was counsel for CBS Films. The declaration continues with more detail. After receiving that earlier letter, the legal teams for Lionsgate Entertainment, Wayfarer Entertainment, and Justin Baldoni laid out a clear explanation in the Flores case. They described, step by step, how they never had access to Mr. Flores's script and how the film 5 Feet Apart had been created independently. The letter even mentioned Baldoni's charity work to give broader context about his character. After that, more supporting documents were produced to reinforce their position. One major contributor was Ambry Genetics Corporation, which provided nearly 1,500 documents. None of them showed any evidence that Mr. Flores's script had ever been shared with a third party, including Baldoni. Importantly, this material hadn't been available to either Brian Friedman or Travis Flores before the original lawsuit was filed. Following several agreed extensions to allow time to review the evidence, Ambry moved to dismiss the complaint, arguing it failed to state a valid legal claim. Then, on March 9, the parties reached a non-confidential settlement that resolved all claims in the Flores litigation. A copy of that agreement was included in Friedman's declaration. Friedman also clarified his timeline with Baldoni. He said he first met him in late December 2024, more than 2 years after the Flores case had already been dismissed. A few days later, Baldoni hired Friedman and his firm to represent him in separate litigation involving Blake Lively and others. Friedman emphasized that the Flores case and the Lively-Baldoni litigation were completely unrelated. In January 2025, media outlets covering the newer case reached out to Friedman. They asked about the publicly known fact that he had once represented Flores in a lawsuit against Baldoni back in 2021. Friedman said he responded with a statement that didn't mention Flores at all and didn't rely on any confidential information. Instead, he summarized the non-confidential terms of the settlement and details learned from the defendants during the earlier litigation. He also referenced Baldoni's involvement in charity work, including efforts connected to his production company. Friedman included a copy of that media statement as evidence. He then explained that on January 30th, Flores's surviving spouse, who also serves as administrator of his estate, requested the full legal file from the earlier case. Friedman's office provided it on a thumb drive containing about 635 megabytes of material, pleadings, documents, correspondence, invoices, agreements, and emails. The spouse confirmed receiving it on February 14, 2025. Of the 236 emails included, Friedman noted that 175 were communications with opposing counsel. He also stated clearly that neither he nor his firm ever represented Flores and Baldoni at the same time. The allegedly defamatory statement at the center of the new lawsuit, he explained, simply said that the investigation showed no wrongdoing and no liability on Baldoni's part, or on the part of Wayfarer or any other defendants. As a result, the case had been closed without liability. He added that this outcome reinforced his view that Baldoni and Wayfarer operated honorably and ethically. In other words, Friedman argued he never spoke about Travis personally. He didn't criticize his character, his personality, or his ethics. He didn't even mention his name, he just described the legal outcome. The letter that was quoted in the filing, written on behalf of CBS Films and their attorneys, described their own investigation. They found that Flores's work had not been plagiarized in any way. Rather, the movie was based on a woman named Claire Wineland, who had cystic fibrosis and appeared in Wayfarer's web series My Last Days. Claire Wineland was the inspiration for the movie. Neither Baldoni nor the screenwriters knew anything about Flores's script, much less read it. Complaint had hypothesized that perhaps Baldoni got the script from a man named Caleb Remington. However, it was evident from the documents that Baldoni and Remington did not meet until after the first draft of the movie had already been written, including almost all of the elements that Flores had said were similar. Because of that timeline, the investigation concluded the film was independently created. Its writers could not have seen or copied anything from Flores's screenplay. A direct comparison of the two works also found no legally recognizable substantial similarity between them. The letter went on to explain that any small similarities between the two works came from something unavoidable. Both stories focus on teenagers living with serious illnesses. In the film, the characters deal with cystic fibrosis, and in the Flores screenplay, the teens face various life-threatening conditions, including CF. When you're telling stories in that space, teen romance mixed with chronic illness, certain elements naturally overlap. Those ideas aren't legally protectable, they're simply part of the genre. The letter then described the real-life inspiration behind the film. Claire Wineland passed away in 2018 after complications from a double lung transplant and a stroke. Justin Baldoni first encountered her while working on the series My Last Days. He had seen videos she created through an educational initiative for people living with terminal illness and was deeply moved by her message. He shared her work, praised her strength, and eventually met her. She later appeared in an episode of the series. Wineland was described as energetic, charismatic, and widely followed on social media. Like the film's main character Stella, she openly documented hospital visits and treatments on YouTube, where many of her videos reached millions. After forming a friendship with her, Baldoni developed the idea for a film centered on a young CF patient, someone trying to live fully, fall in love, and stay hopeful while facing a life-threatening disease. He pitched that idea to CBS in April 2016. A few months later, in August, he was officially hired to develop and direct the project. He brought in writers Mickey Dri and Tobias Iaconis to draft the script, and in January 2017, Wineland joined as a consultant. Travis Flores had also appeared on My Last Days, but it seems Baldoni's relationship with Claire was especially close and steady. There was no falling out. After her death, Baldoni shared a heartfelt tribute, and Claire had always spoken positively about their friendship and collaboration. By March 22, 2017, the first draft of the screenplay was complete. The letter emphasized that nearly every element later claimed to resemble Flores's screenplay was already present in that early version. The draft included a romantic storyline between Stella and Will, both 17-year-old CF patients, along with Stella's best friend Poe. It also explored Stella's grief over her sister Abby's death, and the survivor's guilt that drives her to follow strict medical rules. Abby's memory appeared throughout the story through keepsakes like artwork and a stuffed panda. Complaint had suggested Baldoni might have received Flores's script through someone named Caleb Remington. But the timeline didn't support that theory. Baldoni didn't even meet Remington until late April 2017, after those supposedly similar elements were already written into the script. Emails included in the evidence showed Remington introducing himself and discussing the project after the first draft already existed. Side-by-side comparisons made the differences even clearer. Flores's screenplay focused on a boy attending a camp for seriously ill teens, navigating friendships, group experiences, and camp life. It involved multiple characters, social activities, and a wide range of events. The film 5 Feet Apart, on the other hand, centered on a girl documenting her hospital life online, forming a relationship with another patient, and coping with the painful reality that they can't physically get close because of their condition. The emotional tension of distance, loving someone you can't safely touch, sat at the heart of the story. Beyond the shared idea of teenagers living with illness, the tone and structure were dramatically different. Flores's script leaned into drama, love triangles, parties, and risky behavior. The film took a quieter, more intimate approach, focusing on hospital life, medical struggles, and the emotional weight of survival. The letter concluded that Flores had no clear theory proving his work had been accessed before the film was created, and no strong legal basis to argue the two works were substantially similar. It also pointed out something surprising. Before the lawsuit, Flores himself hadn't claimed the film violated his rights. In fact, he supported its release, attended a premiere, praised it publicly on social media, and spoke positively about it in interviews. Over the years, Flores and Baldoni had maintained a friendly relationship. They texted often. Baldoni helped raise money for Flores's medical care, featured him on My Last Days, and supported him during personal struggles. So from the perspective presented in the letter, the sudden shift toward legal claims didn't line up with their past relationship, and didn't appear to rest on a strong legal foundation. The facts in this case are pretty clear. There simply isn't a good faith basis to assert that the people who made the movie plagiarized ideas from that screenplay. If you look at the differences between the two screenplays, it's obvious that there was no plagiarism. There are even emails that establish the timeline. He didn't meet the person that everyone claimed had shared the screenplay until April 2017, after the essential parts of the movie had already been written. There is also a copy of the settlement agreement, and it wasn't confidential. There was no non-disclosure agreement. Both sides agreed to hold each other harmless and to waive any future claims. In other words, both sides agreed that they couldn't sue each other over the same issue in the future. It was a voluntary agreement, and no one admitted fault. The agreement explicitly states that all parties deny liability or wrongdoing and that nothing in the agreement constitutes an admission of guilt. It also states that Travis voluntarily entered into the agreement without duress or coercion and that it completely resolved the case. What stands out is that there wasn't much direct communication between him and Justin. Most interactions happened through the attorneys involved in the case. Then something else happened. On January 23, 2025, a reporter from the Daily Mail emailed Melissa Nathan, Brian Friedman, and Jennifer Abel asking for comment. The message referenced a story noting that Friedman had previously represented another client in a lawsuit against Justin over the 5 Feet Apart script, and that the case had been dismissed. The reporter asked if there was anything they wanted to add. Interestingly, when Jennifer responded, she didn't copy Jones' works or Justin's team. She only included Melissa, Nathan, and Brian. The response contained Brian's statement that during the copyright case he learned Justin and Wayfarer had done nothing wrong, that there was no liability on their part, and that the case ended without any admission of fault. He added that this confirmed his view that Justin and Wayfarer acted honorably and ethically. That was the entire statement. Around the same time, Stephanie received word that media outlets were looking for comments. Then, on January 30th, Travis's surviving spouse contacted Friedman's office asking for the full legal file. Raises questions. What are the chances that someone might have reached out to the spouse and suggested there was a conflict or that they should consider legal action? That's only a theory, but it's hard not to wonder, especially given how vulnerable someone can be after losing a loved one. Still, it's important to say this response isn't meant to criticize Travis or his spouse. It simply lays out the facts. Two scripts weren't connected. The settlement didn't involve a payout. There's documentation and evidence supporting what Brian Friedman said publicly. There's a hearing scheduled in May on the motion to dismiss, and hopefully by then the situation will be clearer. Ideally, the surviving spouse will understand what's happening and whether the advice they received was truly in their best interest. From this perspective, it seems like poor guidance may have played a role. At the end of the day, the case appears to rest on a misunderstanding of what actually happened. If all the information was already available and known, it raises a bigger question. What was the purpose of filing the lawsuit in the first place? That's just one viewpoint, of course. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and click the bell so you never miss an update. Thanks so much for watching.